Okay, this is part 14, the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History. I just wanted to correct a mistake in the last part. I had said that the empire of Charlemagne was divided up between his three sons, and it was actually his three grandsons. So sorry for that mistake. So continuing on, in the Islamic world, the Fatimid dynasty was increasing in power. They had taken over the island of Sicily, and their navy was appearing more and more in Aegean and Venetian waters. They were a threat to Venice and Italy, but sometimes they may have been actually working with the Venetians and with the papacy. The Fatimids founded the important Caliphate of Kairouan in Tunisia in 909 AD. And also in Europe, something was happening in Gaul or France. The Viking Rollo or Rolf was given the Duchy of Normandy in 911 AD. This was by the Treaty of St. Clair sur Epte. And from that treaty, Rollo's family actually took their name. That became the name Sinclair, and from that time they were known as the Sinclair family, and that would be an important ruling family later. The Duchy of Normandy was named for the Vikings of northern France. Norman was just another form of Northman. The Normans would continue Viking-style raids into the Mediterranean. They would especially threaten Sicily and Italy, and many of them would appear in Italy as religious devotees, but they would end up as soldiers and protectors of both the nobility of Italy and also the papacy. This clear connection with Normans and the papacy is a good clue that the Vatican was already working with Vikings of Northern Europe for the purposes of the Vatican. No doubt some of the Viking families married into the Merovingian families as they came into northern France, and even probably earlier. The Normans were also known to be soldiers for the Lombards in northern Italy and also for Venice. Just a note about the meaning of the name of the city of Venice. There are some theories that you might hear that the name Venice is just a corruption for the word Phoenician because of the Phoenician populace of the city. It is true that there is a connection to Phoenicia. I had said before that there were Syro-Phoenicians that had fled to Venice when the Huns had attacked Italy. But the name of Venice is most probably from the name of the Veneti, which was an old Illyrian tribe in that region related to the Serbians and the Croatians. They were related to a people of the Baltic coast of northern Europe, the Wends or the Vandals, and also the Sorbians of that area. The name Vandal actually is connected to Wend, and that's connected to Veneti, and they migrated back and forth. Venice was at the terminus of an old trade route called the Amber Road. They would bring down amber from the Baltic coast down to Italy. Some believe the Lombards of northern Italy were also related and had originated on the Baltic coast as well, like the Vandals. And the Lombards and Vandals both were considered to be a mixture of Germanic and also Balto-Slavic people. Venice had been under the control of Byzantium. Byzantium would often send political prisoners and exiles and troublers of the Empire of the East to Venice. They would send people like the Khazars and other contenders for the throne. And by this time, many of the Khazars had converted to Judaism, so there was a large amount of Jews in Venice. Much of the population was also openly pagan, and the city of Venice was gaining more and more independence from Byzantium, as I'd said before, and they were threatening the Eastern Empire in the Mediterranean Sea. And they were also probably partly working with the Fatimids, who were also threatening by sea. The Fatimids founded the important Caliphate of Cairo in Egypt in 969 AD, and they were also taking over much of the lands of the Middle East. But Byzantium was having a resurgence also, and they began to take back much of the land in the Middle East. And they also got almost as far as Jerusalem, and they took over the island of Cyprus and also Crete and other islands in the Mediterranean by 975 AD. As the Venetian oligarchy acquired more power, it increasingly opposed the papacy, but both the papacy and Venice were actually two sides of the same Babylonian coin. It's just that the Venetians didn't want to hide behind any cover of Christianity. The papacy was willing to operate in the guise of Christianity, and it also would fuse Christianity with Babylonian religion. And the Venetians didn't regard any one city as important for any trading empire, and they might choose other cities, not any one city like Rome. The papacy was always looking for a militant force to carry out its ecclesiastical authority, and the papacy didn't have a problem with rulers. It's just that the papacy always wanted the authority on their terms, and they struggled with rulers who wanted it on their terms. This would appear in the struggle between the Holy Roman Emperors and the popes. The Holy Roman Emperor had chosen several popes, some of them even being German, with the hopes that the Vatican would do the bidding of the emperor. Pope Leo IX and Holy Roman Emperor Henry III were actually blood relatives. The emperor had installed Leo with the hopes that Leo would act under the authority of the emperor, but Leo actually turned this around, claiming his own authority. Then Leo began to support calls for reform in the Roman Catholic Church, but it appears that the ultimate goal would be that the church would own everything. They would control land ownership, wealth, property, and even employment. The papacy began to demand that priests could not marry, so that there would be no possibility of a hereditary priesthood, and also that any property of the priest would go back to the church when the priest died. And the papacy also demanded that any donations coming into the church would not influence any appointments made by the papacy or any other actions of the papacy. And since the papacy was claiming the authority to appoint kings, they were indirectly claiming the authority over magistrates and law courts. But this really just looks like a power grab of the oligarchy to take legal control over wealth and property, eventually of the whole world. But standing in the way of the papacy was the clergy in Britain and also the Church of Byzantium. They were opposed to these reforms that were being called for. And at this time it appears that the papacy stirred up an old doctrinal dispute to justify itself against the Eastern churches and the churches of Byzantium. The end result was a formal split in 1054 AD with what would be known as the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. The term Catholic is very misleading. The standard meaning is universal, but it appears that the papacy was being very deceptive when it claimed to be the universal church. It was actually claiming to be the universal religion, fusing Christianity with paganism, and also claiming authority over Christianity and even Islam, Judaism, and whatever else. And if you recall, this is just the old Babylonian philosophy of Stoicism concealed in the robes of the Catholic Church. Curiously, right at this time, the Normans began to threaten the coasts and ports of Byzantium. In 1059 AD, Pope Nicholas II made a formal alliance with the Normans, and in 1060 AD, the Normans took over the island of Sicily. The mother of Edward, the King of England, was a Norman. Edward was known to be a devout Roman Catholic. He was called the Confessor, but you might wonder what he was confessing. Was the Roman Catholic Church blackmailing him with something? Did they have something on him? So did they influence him to name William, the Duke of Normandy, as his heir? Whatever the case, William, Duke of Normandy, invaded England and conquered the Anglo-Saxons. He became known as William the Conqueror, and he did this with the total approval of the papacy. It no doubt had the purpose of putting tighter controls on the English clergy through the many Jews that William the Conqueror brought with him into Britain, probably from Sicily. We usually only think of Britain and Normandy when we think of William the Conqueror and the Normans, but the Normans had increasing power throughout the entire Mediterranean. It's just curious how they were able to have so much power so quickly. They took over more of southern Italy and the Adriatic, and they were able to control more and more of the Balkan coast. They were a growing threat to Byzantium itself, and they even plotted to put pretenders on the throne of Byzantium. And the Normans were threatening Byzantium so much by sea that the Emperor of Byzantium, Alexius Komnenos, appealed to both the papacy and also Venice for help against the Normans. And the Venetians were given a trading post within Constantinople in 1082 AD for their help against the Normans. So it just appears that we have a problem-reaction solution between the papacy, the Normans, and possibly the Venetians. They would cause a problem for Byzantium, and then they would offer the solution on the terms of the papacy, of course. Byzantium lost much of its control in the Middle East to the Seljuk Turks. Byzantium was defeated at the Battle of Manzikert by the Turks in 1071 AD. Finally, Emperor Alexius Komnenos of Byzantium called upon Pope Urban II for help against the Seljuk Turks. In 1095 AD, Urban formally called for what would be known as the first and most successful crusade. The Crusaders were able to take over the important city of Antioch and then most of the Holy Land, even Jerusalem. They were able to use the divisions between the Fatimid dynasty and the Seljuk Turks in Islam. A supposedly Christian kingdom was set up in the Holy Land, and there were several orders of knights that were created. They were supposedly established to help pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land and also other crusaders. There were orders like the Knights Templar, the Hospitallers. Most of the knights put their own lands in trust to the papacy when they were away from home at war. But when they returned home, many found their lands seized by the papacy. The papacy had claimed that the knights could not verify who they were. The Seljuk Turks were finally able to take the important stronghold of Edessa from the Crusaders, and this set off what would be known as the Second Crusade, and in this crusade the prominent figure was Bernard of Clairvaux. So I'll continue with the Crusades in the next part, and also with some of the history of the Templars, and also the rise of banking powers in Italy. So until next time.